I feel like the luckiest guy there is to be able to do this, and the responsibility that goes with doing good art and doing projects that have value, that have importance, can't be overemphasized. I think that it's not about just making merch. It's really about doing something that has real value. I ended up coming back and moving to Oxford, England, mm-hmm. and I met a guy who was just this amazing, turned out to be an amazing friend of mine who had just lost his wife in Algeria. They'd been down planting trees for the UN, and his wife had gotten some kind of virus, and they gave her an antibiotic, and she went into anaphylactic shock, and they were in a Catholic monastery. And they didn't have good.
No, you're toast if you don't have it.
And they were way down in southern Algeria, and she died. Mm-hmm. And so he had just returned back to England, where he was from, with his two little kids who were 4 and 6, just shell-shocked. He had this beautiful wife that he'd moved down there with, and she was gone. And he was a translator of ancient Chinese text. And he was translating the great piece of literature that the Chinese really acknowledge as being their greatest piece of historic literature, called The Story of the Stone. And he was translating it with his Oxford Don, David Hawkes, for Penguin. And it turned out they ended up spending 17 years translating this.
That's a life story.
5 thick volumes. It's such a big book, but
Penguin
5 volumes that Penguin published.
And so you hung out
So
with
anyway,
him?
so John and I just kind of became immediate great friends. He was a great concert pianist, and he lived in this public housing right across from a 15th century pub in a little tiny village outside of Oxford. And and I had a mandolin or a banjo or something at that point, and we would put the kids, have dinner, put the kids to sleep. He'd read me the poetry that he had translated that day, and I'd show him the paintings that I'd been painting. I mean, I had a bicycle, and I would go off painting every day.
Still watercolors.
Still watercolors. Yeah. And it turned out, actually, there was a manor house in this little village, and the guy who lived there was a guy named Basil Blackwell, who was a famous book dealer, old book dealer, but had great bookstores called Blackwell's all over
I've heard
England.
of those, actually.
Yeah, and this was where he lived. So I went over and knocked on the door, and I said, you want a painting of your house?
Yeah.
And he said, how much? And I said, 25 quid. And he said, sure. So I did a painting of this great manor house, and he loved it. And he then invited me over for dinner with, a bunch of his friends, and a bunch of his wealthy friends all said, come and paint my house.
Yeah.
So I started, doing these paintings of people's houses.
Right.
For 25 and 35 quid, and I'd bring them over, and they'd be matted, and they look beautiful. And so I was making more money than everybody.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody in the whole neighborhood. And so,
You're making
things were good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you had a free house.
Well, I mean, I would pay Johnny a little rent, and I'd
food,
buy
I'm
groceries,
sure. Yeah.
and we'd,
Watch the kids.
and we'd play music then every night, and had an incredible time. I was there for about 9 months. What was interesting was that I did a show in Oxford, a one-man show of paintings of that area, which went very well. And then I eventually moved into a manor house somewhere else with some other people and was offered a job working at the Museum of Modern Art in Oxford. And at that point, second. Oh, stop me if this just gets to be rambling.
No, there's no rambling.
Okay.
Well, I'm learning a lot of things about you.
Yeah.
You know, the story. Because I think when you do something like that for 9 months, you're making a living, a good living.
Yeah.
I would think it's starting to resonate in your own mind. I'm on the right track. I can do this as a living, and I will do this as a living.
Well, I got good at painting architecture. I loved these houses. These were all, 14th, 15th, 16th, 17th century houses. And I got to know them. I understood, the light was always changing. So I'd sit there and wait for the light to come out so I'd get a burst of sunlight so I could, put in shadows.
Mm-hmm.
But I got really good at painting these, doing paintings on location. But I ended up getting a job at the Museum of Modern Art, and I ended up getting a job doing installations. And this was the only museum of modern art in England at that time. This was 1975 or 6, somewhere around in there. And so, they were doing really interesting shows of the Bloomsbury guys and, the Russian constructivists, El Lissitzky and Malevich, and, a lot of really opening my head to a lot of things. They were also doing Americans, and, and I would have these knockdown, drag-out fights with the director. The first thing that I had to do was put up 200 drawings by who was the guy who did boxes?
Albers?
Who started Marfa.
Oh, Judd.
Donald Judd. So I had to hang 200 8x10 drawings that Donald Judd had thrown together on 2 lines on one long wall. And I thought, what a bunch of crap this is. But I learned about modern art from my friend David Elliott, who was the director of the museum. And he and I got along great and always laughed our asses off. But I was constantly challenging what it was that we were looking at. And we started hanging for Americans that were there. And, people like David Hockney would come over for all the openings. I'd do all the installations, and then I'd end up being the bartender for the parties.
Right.
So I got to know all these guys,
that's
Paul
cool.
Casman and all these guys from London would all come over because it was 40 minutes away, and there was nothing in London, if you can imagine.
No, I can't, actually.
Yeah. This was it. This was the center of modern art in England. And anyway, so that was an amazing education.
Change the way you looked at modern art from that point on?
It changed the way I looked at modern art. It made me appreciate what I considered to be good and interesting. But more than that, because the standards were so high in terms of presentation, how things are hung, it gave me a real sense of how you hang art, and gave me a real sense of taste of how it should look. How an installation should look.
Which helps you tremendously
Which
as a
has
gallerist.
helped me hugely over the years, either in my gallery or in other galleries that I've done shows in. Sometimes I've had to actually, educate people in galleries that I didn't think were doing it well enough.
And you show also at Peter's Gallery, right?
Well, I have.
Yeah.
I mean, I've shown in a lot of other galleries. Spanierman was my big gallery in New York for years. I did many one-man shows there.
They're gone, though, right? Doesn't Ira?
Yeah, they're gone.
Yeah.
Ira died. Yeah.
Ira died.
And Gavin is working for
Gerald.
Jerry.
Yeah, that's what I thought. So when you come back, I will move it along a little bit because I want to make sure we get into your architectural stuff with steel mills that you're doing right now currently. But when you come back from Europe, so this is late 70s kind of thing?
Well,
mid 70s?
my biggest stretch was moving to Dublin in 1977 to learn how to play the Irish bagpipes. And but and ended up meeting, all the great Irish musicians. And I mean, I remember one day I was helping my friend Kevin Burke, the great fiddle player, move, and we were carrying his record collection. And we'd pick up a stack of records, and I started seeing, well, I did that cover, and then we'd put and there was another cover that I had done, and that we ended up finding half a dozen album covers of mine in his records. And he said, well, I'm working on a record right now. You want to do the cover? So slowly I started, I set up a design studio in Dublin doing album covers.
I'll be there.
So for 2.5 years, I had a design studio in Dublin, and I did all of the great album covers. And there was incredible music happening in those days.
At any point did you go, maybe I just should live here and this is where I should be?
Oh, I was living there.
No, but
and
I mean,
never,
like, this is where I should be forever?
And I did. For many years, I did. And then out of the blue, I was out bicycling out in the west of Ireland with my then girlfriend, and I remember hearing a voice in my head saying, "It's time to go home." And that was it. That was it. I don't know. I've always felt a certain amount of direction, and I've always, had a sort of an intuitive sense of what to do, and that was a pretty clear voice that day.
It.
Yeah,
and that
it said the voice said it's time to go home.
And you had been, and that was clearing
I've been
out
gone
5
for
years.
5 years,
And the last couple were in Dublin.
and I hadn't been home at all. I mean, there were periods where my family didn't even know what country I was living in. There were periods that I was so isolated from everybody.
Did you love Ireland?
Love Ireland.
Yeah, it's really wonderful.
Still
they
go
were
over
having
a lot.
problems at that time, right, with the IRA.
They
and
were,
things.
yeah. That was the time of the Troubles.
Yeah, I mean, there was bombings and things going on.
There were,
yeah. What was that like?
Well, there weren't bombings in Dublin.
Yeah.
But
Belfast,
I did travel with the Bothy Band up north, up to Belfast. And that was dangerous and scary. The British troops, you couldn't go into any building without going through being searched, and everything was surrounded by barbed wire, and it was a pretty scary time.
And so you come back, you hear the voice, you leave the girlfriend, I guess. She stays in Ireland. Yep. And you come back to Denver?
I came back to Denver or Evergreen because that was where all my stuff was stashed.
Where was it stashed?
With friends up in the mountains.
And they hadn't gotten rid of it? Some of them did. Right?
No, strangely enough, it was still stored in Sally Ann. And
yeah, because they probably didn't know if you're alive or dead, maybe.
People, they kind of knew I was coming back for it.
Yeah.
But they had no idea when.
So a lot of it was stashed in Sally Ann?
Yeah.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah.
And so that's...
But I didn't have much. And I came back with nothing. I mean, it was another one of those moments where I had nothing to show for all of this time. And, I was 30, and, my friends were married. A lot of them had jobs. A lot of them owned houses. A lot of them had businesses that were...
This is like 1980?
This is like 1980.
Yeah.
And I had nothing.
But that probably didn't bother you.
It was okay.
Right?
It was okay.
And so...
I like starting fresh.
And so what did you think you would do at that time? Did you have a plan, or you were just going to do like you always do and go knock on doors?
I knew I kind of explored, and I knew I was going to need to get a leg up. So I ended up, and I had a graphic design studio, and I had a business, and I had a business sense of how to do that. So I figured out where was the best ad agency in Denver. Mm-hmm. So I had, grown up around the ad world. My grandfather had an ad agency in New York, and my father ran Foot Cone and Belding in San Francisco, and so the ad world was akin to the design world. So I met a guy named Chuck Bartholomew who ran Evans and Bartholomew in Denver, and he said, well, I've been thinking about starting a design studio within the ad agency. And I said, well, I'll do that for you. So that was the only job I've ever had. For 2 years, I ran that design studio.
And what did you learn from that?
That I don't want to work for anybody.
That's an important thing, actually.
Yeah. And it doesn't really work. I'm not really cut out to work for anybody.
And what do you think that is?
I like being the boss.
Yeah. Yeah, I understand that too.
Just like you.
Yeah, no, I totally get it.
Yeah.
I don't.
You don't work for anybody.
No, I don't.
Yeah.
I won't.
And probably haven't, or maybe did for a short period. But
I've had this. I was a Navy doctor, so I had to work for that boss for a while.
Yeah, that's a boss.
Yeah, that's a real boss. You learn a lot about that.
Yeah.
And so you do that for 2 years.
So I did that for 2 years. And then within that period of time, I just said, that doesn't really work for me. And it was my least creative period of my life.
You were working so hard, probably.
Well, I was working, and I wasn't painting, and I wasn't photographing, and I wasn't dreaming, and I wasn't, doing all of the things, conjuring, that you have to do when you live a creative life.
It's really true. I don't think people realize that, but you have to tap into that.
Oh, yeah. And you have to live in it.
That's right.
It's not a part-time thing. It's not on the weekends or after work or, that's the job. And the job is all day, every day. You can be sitting there having a meal with your wife, but in reality,
your mind's going somewhere
you're
else too.
Thinking about, whatever it is. You're there, but you're always
churning.
You're always coming up with ideas and things, and it's just that's what we do.
So that's 1982. You're done with them, more or less, and then what?
Then I set up a real design studio, and really had real clients. It was a time when cable TV was dominant in Denver, and I had the best client, and the best client followed me and wanted me to continue to do. I had a few really good clients, and so I ended up setting up a big office.
And you were doing that, and so that was
and we were doing other things too. We were doing
design.
Yeah, and we were doing, some album covers, and we were doing, books and annual reports and, whatever else needed to get done. But it was a business. And, at one point I had 12 people.
Oh, yeah. Now you're really making money and have responsibility.
No, I wasn't making money.
Making
but I
money
was,
for them, maybe.
It was actually a real pain.
Yeah.
It was interesting because the bigger you get, the better jobs you get. But it's not a business that you get into to make money at. And nor, it also became kind of a fashion business. Whatever was fashionable in the world of graphic design was what many clients wanted. And that didn't interest me at all. So at a certain point, I announced that I was closing down my graphic design business. And really what I wanted to do was paint. And I'd been painting all along, but slowly I had started weaving paintings into businesses, and I started finding galleries that were interested in representing me. And, a lot of the paintings around the Southwest, like Taos, I started out with Ed Morgan. Remember Ed Morgan? Yeah, I don't think he's alive anymore.
And this is mid-'80s.
This is mid-'80s. And I remember saying, here are some paintings of mine, and them going, oh, these are great. And then I sent down paintings that I thought were great. Well, they weren't paintings of Taos, and they went, well, we only want paintings of Taos. We only want paintings of Taos Mountain and the Pueblo and and I thought, well, shit, that's not really, I mean, I like paintings of Taos, but I'm not going to send you
What you
20
want.
paintings of Taos. And I kind of realized that a lot of people really wanted, kind of souvenirs.
Yeah, regional stuff.
Yeah, and I didn't really want to do that. I started finding other subject matter that I found interesting. I started painting kind of accoutrement of Indian, of kachinas, and masks and rattles and some of those kind of things, and did start, and there was a market for those, and we sold a lot of that. Will Channing was an old friend of mine, and so and he had a gallery on the square.
Yeah, upstairs.
Yeah, upstairs. So I was showing with Will.
Yeah, Channing
Dale Throckmorton. Yeah. And then I met. Just think, how did that go? I was asked by Kurt Marcus to go out to the first Cowboy poetry gathering in Elko, Nevada, and that was like 1985. And I didn't go that first year, but I went the next year and started meeting a lot of the cowboys out in Nevada. Mm-hmm. And they were wild, and they were guys that I really didn't know. They were a different breed of man.
Yeah.
And in a lot of ways, they were capable, they were self-sufficient in a way that we had always wanted to be as hippies in the Bay Area, up in Marin and Sonoma. Mm-hmm. But they could actually do it. They could rebuild carburetors and engines, and they could roof a house, and they could fix a broken leg, and they could, cook a meal and redo the heater, and they really were used to living out on their own on 1 million acres. Mm-hmm. And I found that fascinating. And they rode beautifully, and they knew what
they were authentic.
They were the real deal.
Yeah.
And
yet also poets.
And some of them were poets, and some of them were articulate, and some of them were not necessarily. But they became. I became fascinated with them. So I would go, and we got along well. So they would invite me out, and I would go out and stay with them. And I just started, painting them, not necessarily thinking that I was following in the footsteps of Charlie Russell and Frederick Remington, but there was an authentic inspiration from being out there. Mm-hmm. Plus, those big ranches are.
The landscapes are gorgeous.
Completely different than small ranches where you can get into town in 20 minutes. They're really self-sufficient communities that people really depend on each other. So I started painting those guys, and those caught on more than sort of anything that I had done in the past. And I liked doing it.
Yeah, and you'd found something that you enjoyed, and the public, the collector base goes, wow, this is different, and we like. And it was very successful from it sounds like maybe from the get-go?
Pretty close. Yeah, it was interesting. People really responded.
That's 86, 87?
It's more like 89, 91, 92.
Okay.
Basically, I had announced that I was going to close down my studio as of 1990, but it took several years for my client base to
let you go,
accept the fact that I was not going to be available. Mm-hmm. They kept giving me
work.
Great projects, and I thought,
did this transition right into your gallery, that space?
Yeah, and then I slowly turned my design studio space into art gallery, and then I thought, well, I need to really do this in a good way. So that's when I moved to 16th and Wazee and got a street level, great space, and a gallery director. And
what did you call the gallery?
William Matthews Gallery.
Just like it is now.
Yep. Yeah. Now, Then I tried to change it, but,
When did you start wearing the hat?
I've been wearing hats since I can remember.
Was there ever a time where you go, this is kind of who I am and what I wear?
I've been wearing hats since I was a hippie.
Yeah. So you've always loved hats.
I've always loved hats. Yeah. And I've always, all those early pictures of me, I always had hats on.
Yeah. Because, I mean, when I think of you, I think of your hat. When I think of my father, he had a Texas Stetson on his whole life. I can't ever remember him not having one on.
Yeah.
Unless it was super hot, then he might put one that was
Straw.
It's
interesting, it's not. I don't really think about it. The hat's on most of the time. I feel more comfortable.
Yeah. Well, Dixon did the
I paint
same,
with a hat on. In the
that's
studio, I paint. Oftentimes when I'm in the house having dinner.
I get it. So it's just part of who you are.
Just part of who I am.
Maybe in some way that's you saw that in the Cowboys too, because a cowboy without a cowboy hat's not a cowboy. I've never known well, it's not true. It depends. There's different kinds of cowboys.
No, there was never a kind of. It never felt to me to be kind of a superficial thing. It was always.
I don't mean that.
These guys are. The Nevada Buckaroos are to me more interesting, kind of in the way they dress. But there's other guys who. I've taken a certain amount of criticism because people say, "Oh, the Buckaroos, they're kind of snazzier looking," but I just, a lot of what they do has a sort of tradition to it, and they don't, guys who have no real style still look, styling.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I grew up in a ranching farming community, so everybody wore cowboy hats or a ball cap, and that was it.
For a reason.
Yeah.
I'm in Colorado where the sun is beating down all the time. Yeah. You're in Arizona.
I don't go anywhere.
You got to be outside.
I don't go anywhere without a hat.
Absolutely. Yeah. There are really good reasons. 15 minutes you start.
Yeah.
You've got enough skin cancers as it is.
True. And so you develop a what I would call a signature style to when I think of your work. A
lot of that came from the early English watercolors. I started. When I was living in Oxford, I started really researching and following those great English watercolors from the early 19th century, John Sell Cotman, and the whole world of them. Mm-hmm. And a lot of them painted on colored papers, and I loved what they were doing. So I started buying Barsham Green paper, which was the great English watercolor paper. And until they went out of business while I was there. And then I bought up everything I could find. And then when I came back to America, I discovered Twin Rocker, a great handmade watercolor paper maker in Indiana. And I showed them papers that I had found in England, and they started reproducing them for me. So I had all that paper made for me exactly the way I wanted it.
It's interesting.
Twin Rocker.
Because I see your paper and it is different. There is a uniqueness to it.
It's beautiful.
Yeah, it is beautiful.
Yeah.
I didn't know that, but I do recognize the fact that the paper seemed of a high quality.
Catherine Clark and her husband Howard Clark started this beautiful handmade paper company in Indiana. She had worked at Gemini in L.A., and he was an engineer. And so she is an artist and he is an engineer. They put their mind together on a family farm that he had inherited out in Brookston, Indiana, and started developing the most beautiful handmade papers and the machines to make them on. Because he was such a great engineer, he could figure out how to make beaters that were better than anything that was used in Italy or Japan. And so to this day, Twin Rocker still makes the best watercolor paper.
And you always use their
I always use their paper.
I think that's important. It gives it a consistency as well.
Well, they, the materials in watercolor are very simple. They're pigment and paper and brushes. So the paper is really important. The pigment is of course fundamental, and I use Winsor Newton just because I've been using the same paint since I was 7, and I use great brushes, and I use handmade brushes that I've got a company in France that I discovered many years ago that have sort of long pointed Kolinsky sable tips, and I started. Andrew Wyeth became a great friend of mine over the years, and I started, getting Andy brushes, and he loved them so much. He said to me a number of times, there are paintings that I can do now only because of the brushes and how beautiful they are.
And how did you meet him? Knock on the door?
I met him through friends who eventually said, well, Andy would love to meet you.
Nice.
And so I ended up meeting him, and he and I just got along really well. And he made a point of maintaining that friendship until he died.
Wow.
So we had meals together every year, and we talked and exchanged letters, and he sent me a painting on my 50th birthday, and we just had a lovely. He was such an inspiration.
And an exceptional watercolorist.
Oh, he's incredible. Yeah, he's the best.
When you see something like that, because he's unbelievable. Do you? Part of you go,
yeah.
How do I get there?
Yeah, that's throw in the towel now.
Yeah, it has to be a little bit of that way.
Yeah, it's completely intimidating, but he was so encouraging, and he was so enthusiastic, and he was such a a supportive friend that I couldn't not.
Yeah, and I think having someone like that close, you probably glean some kind of something from it that helps your own artwork.
Oh, completely. Yeah. No, he painted beautifully till the day he died at 91. For him, that's what he did. He lived a really insulated and privileged life, but I live a privileged life. I have the opportunity to work hard, and because it took me so long to become a full-time artist, I really appreciate what it's worth. I appreciate what the value of it is, and I never take it for granted.
And you're working on a project right now, which is and those are oils though, right? That you're painting on the metal, or is that?
Oh, well, that's acrylic that I'm painting on metal, yeah.
Well, because I want to talk about that.
Yeah.
Because it is something that's up right now, right? It's up for
that's right.
For the Denver show that they have at the stockyards and all that kind of stuff, right?
Well,
it's in your gallery.
It's in my gallery right now during the time of the Coors Western Art Show. But, interestingly enough, so I've been painting the West, and I've been painting cowboys and horses and everything for a long time, but I've always also gone off and done tangent projects.
That's right, and I've seen those, and those are beautiful as well.
Yeah, and that's part of what has kept my head sane and allowed me to always explore what was interesting, but then always feel enthusiastic about coming back and painting the West and where I live.
And so this is one of those projects. In fact, for anybody
this is one of those projects
who happens to be watching this on YouTube, that's what the book looks like too. So you can get it from Willy's.
We did a catalog, and we've done many catalogs over the years. I've
books too. You did
books.
I've seen it.
Done a number of books.
Really beautiful, which you gave me, in fact.
Oh, good.
Yeah, inscribed.
Good.
But this project is architectural steel mills. And how did that come about?
Well, early on, when I spent a summer at Carnegie Tech in Pittsburgh, it was a time when the steel mills were prominent and dominant on the skyline. City was smoky, and but there was activity, and I always found it really compelling, and it was something that I always wanted to get into and explore. And it took me years, as many of the great projects that we all think about, sometimes you have to really be patient. And it took me years to be able to get into some of these steel mills. But once I got in, they were more exciting than I had imagined.
Yeah, you have to see it live, right? I mean, you have
to get in.
Yeah, to get the essence of what it is. I would think that's true.
But they're very similar. I've always been drawn to working men, and I've always been drawn to what labor is. And it's the same instinct that drew me to the Cowboys, the steel workers.
But you chose to paint these on pieces of metal too, right?
Some of them are painted on actual sheets of steel.
Yeah, I think that's wonderful.
Well, I like experimenting. I did a show of giant neckties a few years ago.
I read about that, actually.
Yeah, and I think that they're really cool, and I still think they're really cool. Still have a lot of them, as a matter of fact.
It's okay.
Because a lot of people didn't necessarily think it was as interesting as I did.
Yeah.
But, in early days, the tie was the one thing that people had to present themselves. People would all wear the same suit and the same shoes and a white shirt and
their form of
maybe
creativity.
a hat. But their form of sort of announcing to the world who they were was their tie. And I'd been dreaming about doing this because I love the shape of ties. And some of it may have come from Bob Wade. You remember Bob Wade, who just died? And the sense of scale and the sense of Western scale, but I've been dreaming about this as a project, so I ended up saying, okay, I don't want to be on my deathbed and thinking, wish I'd done that show of ties. So I made a commitment, and I worked on prototypes and figured out how to get the shapes that I wanted.
Because these are large.
Some of them are 7 feet long, but they're so cool the way they hang. So I did a lot of them.
And can someone see these at your studio?
They can.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go see those too.
Yeah, and they're really cool.
Yeah.
Everybody that owns one, and we did sell a lot of them, loves them. They have them in their house. Some of them have them in their offices. They're totally cool.
Well, I think as an artist, as a gallerist too, you have to have projects that sometimes may not be financially viable, but you don't care because it's something you want to do, it interests you, and you're willing to put in the effort, the money, and the energy. And if it hits, great, and if it doesn't, who cares? I did a Hawaii show, which I loved.
Right.
We sold paintings, we sold
Few.
things.
Yeah,
we sold some big ones, actually. But, it is in the desert. It wasn't done in Honolulu.
Right.
But it was great. We had hula dancers here and served Hawaiian food.
Perfect.
And
Spam.
it was wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah.
And all that.
Yeah.
And now you finished a major project just recently, which I've been following on your Facebook, which is that's the Dickies Arena in Fort Worth, right?
It's the biggest commission that I've ever gotten, and it was so exciting to be involved with the architects and to be cooperating, to enhance this amazing project. So they built an event center down in Fort Worth, Texas, and we got the job to do the artwork over the whole south entrance. And because it was the south, it was going to get direct sun from dawn to dusk, so it couldn't be paint. So in working on what was going to be maintenance-free, it had to be a mosaic. So we ended up finding an incredible mosaic studio down in Cuernavaca, Mexico, after interviewing all of the great mosaic studios around the world. These guys really did the best work. And so we worked for 9 months. 28 women sat at a table 65 feet long, installing tiny little pieces of glass hand by hand, piece by piece. And the
all off
result,
your painting.
all off my painting,
Right.
yeah, all off my design.
Right.
And then I wanted bookends on either side, thinking that that's the way it would have been done in a great classical building in Italy. So I designed these figures. The theme is horses, so the mosaic is wild horses. And on the left side is a mounted cowboy tipping his hat, welcoming people in. And on the right-hand side is a Comanche warrior.
The horse people.
The horse people, exactly. I mean, it had to be to show the native culture versus the Anglo culture. It had to be Comanche.
Yeah, I agree, especially for Texas.
Especially for Texas.
And you did the drawing.
So I did the paintings and figures and everything, and then Buckeye Blake did the sculpting, and Buck is fantastic, as you all know.
As is Teal Blake.
Yeah.
Shout out to Teal.
As is Teal.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. We represent him here. So.
Oh, you do?
Yeah, so we have to give a shout out
good.
to Teal. And so they just installed those, right?
Yeah, just went in October.
So how unbelievably scary was it when you're putting those things in with, I guess, huge cranes, because they must weigh insane amounts of weight.
The whole thing was engineered. My partner in these public art projects is a guy named John Grant, who is just the best. He's the best that exists. And he engineered everything. And, of course, the Mosaic Company in Mexico knew exactly what they were doing. They've done a bunch of subway stations in Brooklyn, and they've done projects all over the world, and they really know how to install. And John designed the bronzes to be installed as well, and it went off without a hitch. I mean, there were little problems all along the way, but the bronzes really weigh under a ton. They weigh about 1,600 pounds, but they did have to swing from a blind lift at a different part of the building on a 200-foot crane and swing into place, and with about a quarter of an inch all the way around, and they were perfect. Absolutely perfect.
And did you have to make sure that was part of your?
Oh yeah, I was in charge of. I mean, I was responsible for the installation.
Yeah, because if it's off,
no, it had. I mean,
you're in trouble.
We had to coordinate with the building, with the engineers of the building. The building, the spaces for the mosaic and for the bronzes were slightly off here and there by a 1/16 or an 1/8 of an inch, in diagonal dimensions. But in general, we had good spaces, and everybody that worked on the project was just top notch.
Yeah, and so just to make it was 9 months working.
We were actually working on the whole. The mosaic took 9 months for the mosaic part of it, and then installation was another month and a half on top of that.
And then before that, just getting it organized and all that had
and
to be
winning
a
the
couple of
competition.
years. Yes.
Yeah. So the whole thing was about 20 months.
Yeah, and you had to probably go to Mexico on a
We went to Mexico a
regular
lot.
basis to make sure everything was going well. That has to be very gratifying to see something like that up there.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, right. Would you put that as one of the top things for you?
Oh, absolutely. It's the biggest project that I've ever done. But it's like, great projects everywhere. You work really hard and you see them. It's really hard for me to say, gee, I'm responsible. There are so many people along the way, no matter what it is, whether it's, I remember years ago going to Iceland in 1975 and seeing a poster of mine that I'd done for Dickie Betts of the Allman Brothers, and seeing it up in a record store in Reykjavik, and there were no tourists anywhere, and thinking, oh shit, that's pretty amazing.
That is amazing.
And it was amazing. And I was a kid, and I had done that, a while before. But that was kind of like the biggest moment, because that was the first time that I'd ever really been surprised to see something of mine. And now, you work really hard on these things. You really have to have some separation before you can appreciate the value of what it is you've done, I've done.
And it'll be there, though. I mean, your obituary is going to have that.
That'll
as
be
one
there.
Thing.
Yeah.
That as long as that stadium is there, and that's a new stadium.
Yeah,
that's
brand
going
new.
to be. And I love the fact that they did all Western, and they did other murals on the other side that was Western and Texas history from the 1850s, I guess.
They did. Yeah. Well, Fort Worth, Texas, is a special town. It's a special place.
Yeah.
And, as Steve Miller said when he played the first concert for the people who worked on the building, he said, you can be really proud of this building. Most cities go for the lowest bid and they try to get it done as cheaply as possible. In Fort Worth, they want it to be great. And they want the workmanship to be great, and they want the materials to be great, and they really want things to last.
Yeah.
And that's such an attitude that is so rare these days.
And it is amazing. I mean, I haven't seen it in person, but I watched it on your Facebook site as it went along.
Oh, good.
And I've seen it online.
Good.
And I'd recommend everybody go and look at it. It's really quite something.
Yeah.
So any passing words? We're kind of finishing up our end so we can go have Mexican food with Larry Kanzler. But any passing words you'd like to say to, maybe artists out there?
Ooh, boy, I feel like the luckiest guy there is to be able to do this, and the responsibility that goes with doing good art and doing projects that have value, that have importance, can't be overemphasized. I think that it's not about just making merch. It's really about doing something that has real value, and I would just say appreciate what your voice is, because it's not something to be wasted or taken for granted.
Well, and I can honestly say you have done things that do have worth.
Well, thank you.
And you do have your voice.
Well, thanks.
And I've been a fan. I've always been a fan, and I was really thrilled that you could come on today. And now they could go to is it williamsmatthews.com?
William Matthews
Studio.com. And see his work and listen to this podcast. Thank you so much for coming on. That was really fun. You're fantastic. I can hardly wait
Mark.
I want to go see your stuff in Denver. I want to see this new stuff still.
Come.
All right, I will.
Great.
And how long is that up to, by the way?
I don't know, probably another month.
Okay, so up through February, you can see it. All right,
Yeah.
William Matthews. Thanks.
Thanks, Mark.
Oh, so fun.
Oh, God, how long was that?
Care to guess?
An hour?
Nope. We need your support for the Medicine Man Gallery channel, so make sure to click the subscribe button and tap the little bell icon to be notified when we upload a new video, which we do every morning on Wednesday and Friday. See you soon.